This is episode 29 of the 99 Forever podcast. I'm Eric Friesen, and tonight I'm pleased to be joined by Copper and Blue writer Preston Hodgkinson. Preston, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me, Eric.
Yeah, thanks for being here. I've wanted to have you on the show for a while now. We've been talking about this, I think, since before the season actually got started. So it's good we could find a night to talk some Oilers hockey.
Well, yeah, it's been quite a crazy time, so I'm glad that we're finally able to figure out a time that works.
Yeah, man, and it's also a great night to record an episode because we've got a big Oilers win to talk about.
Yes, absolutely. A huge win over the Flames. But I can't say it was unexpected. The Flames are sliding, and for the Oilers to pick up that point, hey, it just cements their playoff status.
Absolutely. But since you're a first-time guest, before we break down the Battle of Alberta, I'd just like to find out a little bit about your hockey background. So when did you first get interested in hockey, and how did you become a fan of the Oilers?
Yeah, so I'm a fairly young fan. I'm 21 years old, and I grew up in Peace River, Alberta, in a family that wasn't too into hockey. Actually, the first time I ever watched a hockey game was Game 7 of the 2006 Stanley Cup Final. So
Oh,
it was when
wow.
the Oilers actually lost to the Carolina Hurricanes, but for whatever reason, my parents decided to have a little get together. And just as soon as I seen the sport on TV, I was hooked. I had friends in hockey, so they kind of taught me a little bit about the game, and I latched on to the hometown Oilers, and here I am 15 years later or something. I can't do math.
Yeah.
Still just as big as a fan as I was back then. So, or even more of a fan. So, yeah.
So that was a pretty interesting time to first become an Oilers fan. You would have been, I guess, just 6 years old at the time, if my math is right now. But you at least got to watch the Oilers in the Stanley Cup Final. I'm sure if someone would have told you what the next 10 years might have looked like, I jokingly say you might have picked a different team to follow.
Yeah, I might have gone to the Hurricanes, but even then they haven't had a great decade either. But,
No.
I think I'm a pretty loyal person, so I picked my team and I wasn't about to abandon them. And I think being a fan of such a bad team for so long has kind of helped me become more resilient as a person. I'm used to being disappointed by the things I cheer for, and I'm able to savor some of the high points of the fandom.
Yeah, that's awesome, and I think that's one thing about Oilers fans. We are very fiercely loyal to our team, and like I was born at the tail end of the Oilers dynasty, so I missed all the Gretzky years. But when I really started to come on as a fan in the late '90s, that's when the Oilers were this lunch bucket gritty team that grinded their way to wins every time. They didn't have a ton of skill, but it was just a full team effort to get the victory every night. And they sort of were just a middle of the road team, for about almost a decade there from the say late 90s to mid to late 2000s, which ultimately led to the cup run in '06 when they loaded up following the lockout. But yeah, it's always interesting to just hear about fans from different eras. I mean, I've had fans on this podcast who were around from the WHA era back in the 1970s, all the way up to younger fans like yourself. I think you actually are the youngest fan I've had on the podcast, and yeah, it's just interesting. Did you have a chance to attend any Oilers games at old Rexall Place when you were a kid? And who were one or two of your favorite players growing up?
Oh yeah, for sure. I was able to attend a few games before they moved into Rogers Place. Um, a few favorite Oilers. I think growing up it was Dwayne Rollison was my first real favorite player. And then as I learned more about the history of the Oilers and when the Oilers reacquired Smith, I really latched onto him as another favorite player of all time. But yeah, it's weird talking to people because most of the people I talk to are a bit older than me, like yourself, and they have memories of Gretzky and Doug Waite. And for me, those guys are Taylor Hall and Jordan Eberle, which is pretty recent, right? So it's strange.
Yeah, and that was an era of hockey I really, I mean, as bad as the Oilers were, those were fun guys to watch. They gave fans a reason to come back and watch night after night when you had these young superstars that were coming into the team like Taylor Hall, Ryan Nugent Hopkins, Jordan Eberle. And it was kind of an interesting time for me because this was the first time when NHL players were either my age or younger than me. Now it's like all the guys getting drafted are over a decade younger than me, so it doesn't feel as strange anymore. But at that time, all these guys, Eberle's like a year younger than me, Taylor Hall's a couple of years younger than me, Nuge, right around there too. So did you get that feeling too when the NHL players started to be the same age as you?
Yeah, no, the for me it was me being older than Evan Bouchard by about a month. And when that happened, that was a little strange. But well, now there's guys being born 1 or 2 years after me,
Yeah, like
and it's something you get used to, I guess.
yeah, like you look at this past year's draft, there's some O2 borns in the system now, which, I can remember 2002 very vividly. So I mean that's when that's when it starts to feel a little weird. But no,
Yeah,
it's cool that the Oilers are finally starting to put some young, talented players in the system, and hopefully we'll get to see guys like Dylan Holloway playing in Bakersfield very soon. Um, just to kind of wrap up on this segment, do you have a favorite memory as an Oilers fan, or one thing that sticks out to you? I know obviously the 2006 Stanley Cup Finals a great time to start being a fan, so I'm sure that one jumps to the top of your mind right away. But is there anything else that in your early days of watching the Oilers that you kind of cherish?
yeah. Well, I think I'm gonna be. It's a recent memory because the 2017 Stanley Cup playoff run was the first real playoff run that I was cognizant of during my entire fandom. So that's a high point for sure. And I remember being at a friend's house here in Peace River and watching David Desharnais' overtime winner, and it just being the most Oilers related happiness I've ever felt in my life. So I think that pops out. And then obviously when the Oilers won the 2015 NHL draft lottery, I was working in an A&W kitchen, and I glanced at my phone and I swear I let out a scream in that kitchen. So those two memories for sure, I think, top the list.
I think those have to be two of the biggest moments of the 2010s in Oilers hockey. Like it wasn't a great decade for the team, but those two I think stick out right away. The other one that comes to mind from the decade is the Sam Gagner 8-point night. That
Yes.
that would have to be one of the ones. If I'm just thinking, if I was a younger Oilers fan, that would be one of the ones that. I mean, I think 23 at the time when it happened, but that was one that I'll always remember, especially because Sam Gagner is an '89 born. I'm an '89 born. You know, I've followed his whole career. I wish he was still with the team. I know there's some fans that would love to see Ken Holland pick him up at the trade deadline and bring him back to Edmonton, but hey, who knows? Maybe he'll wind up back at the Orange and Blue eventually.
Yeah, for sure. I've always loved Sam Gagner, and I've always thought he'd be a fantastic player development coach, and maybe he makes his way back to Edmonton.
Yeah, I think I remember it. It might have been Mark Spector who put that out last summer that he had heard Ken Holland was either recruiting or had mentioned to Gagne that when his career's over, he would love to hire him into their hockey operations department, either to be maybe an assistant general manager, player personnel, whatever it may be. But as long as fans don't get too bent out of shape about hiring another ex-Oiler to work in management, I think he could be a good fit.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you look at guys like Sean Horkoff, he's working in the Detroit Red Wing system, I think, as a
Yeah.
player development guy. And I think a guy like Sam Gagner would fit that role like a glove, right? And I heard he loves Edmonton. I think he spends his summers in Edmonton. So it just makes so much sense.
Yeah, his wife is from there. That's where they met. And obviously, seems like from all the interviews I've heard with him over the years that this is a place that he plans to retire when he's done playing hockey. So that's really encouraging. And just to, have guys who love playing in oil country, there's always that stigma, right? That a bunch of players don't want to sign there, or that it's not a number one destination, or that it's on a bunch of guys no trade lists. But when you find players who really want to be a part of this team and be a part of this community, you have to hold on to them. And that's sort of like Ryan Nugent Hopkins right now and the whole contract situation with him. By all accounts, he wants to remain an Oiler. And after putting up with a decade of, mostly bad teams, he's finally seeing Edmonton right the ship, and he's fiercely loyal to this city as well. I think he wants to stay.
Yeah, for sure. I really like Nugent Hopkins. I think he should be signed. I get a little iffy when higher numbers are thrown around on him because he is getting up there. He's almost 30, so you don't want to be throwing like 7 years, 7 million at a guy like that where it brings him into his mid 30s. But for sure, if you can find a decent uh, contract value on like a 5 year deal, I do it every day of the
Hmm.
week.
Yeah, and there was just that report put out, I think, by Frank Saravelli over this past week that he had rejected a 5-year deal. They didn't disclose what the numbers were, but I think the big point that I want to make is that he just wants to stay in Edmonton, and they have to figure out a way to make this work. I really wanted his contract to be settled before the season, so we weren't dealing with this leading up to the trade deadline or anything like that. But I just I have a feeling it'll all get settled out eventually. Just hopefully they can work it out in the next couple weeks. I would, prefer to see it done just so that there aren't any speculation about him potentially getting moved.
Yeah, I don't think the Oilers are necessarily interested in moving him out.
I
I
don't
think
think
I've
so
heard
either.
reports from Daniel Nugent Bowman, I think his
Hmm.
name is, from the Athletic saying that they weren't really looking for that. And the Oilers are in a playoff spot. They're in a strong position in the North Division, and you don't trade guys like Nuge when you're in a position like that.
No, and Daniel's a good writer. And speaking of writing, you and I also have a similar background both in sports media. I'd like to just get a thought from you on how did you first get interested in that career path, and what sort of led you to getting into writing for the Copper and Blue?
Yeah, so I think my dad actually gave me this idea back when I was gotta be like grade 7 or grade 8, and he mentioned about being a sports broadcaster, and that just resonated with me. I loved writing at the time. I was a huge sports fan, and I actually got my start at the Oilers rig with Alex Thomas. I wrote there for a few years, and I had to leave because I had to focus on my schooling, and I was in high school. So a few years went by, and I decided to pick it up in my second year of university, which was about 2 years ago. And I just put out a call on Twitter, and someone got me in contact with Jeff, my editor over at Copper and Blue, and he took me on, and it's been smooth sailing ever since then.
That's awesome. And where did you go to school, and what did you take, by the way?
I went to McEwen University, and I
Okay.
am in my fourth year currently studying journalism.
Oh, good for you. So you'll have a journalism degree very soon.
Yes.
I studied TV and radio broadcasting in Calgary at Mount Royal University, and then I took a really interesting graduate program in Toronto at Centennial College. They have a sports journalism 1-year program there, and that was a fantastic experience getting to go there and be in the big city. And I wasn't even the only Oilers fan in the class, if you can believe it. There was one other girl who who cheered for the team, so I had at least some support amongst the Leaf fans.
Yeah, you don't want to be the only one in a city of Leafs fans.
Well, I kind of expected that I would be. This was during the 2017 playoff run too, so I had a little bit of bragging rights that they made it further than Toronto that year. But no,
That's true.
that's awesome, man. And I see that you have now started up your own podcast over at the Copper and Blue. I think you just released episode 4 recently, is what I listened to.
Yeah, so yeah, we've been talking about starting a podcast over at Copper and Blue for quite a while. I gotta say, since this last summer, I think it was brought up, and it took a while to get off the ground. But I got a few great co-hosts in Shona and Corey, and we record every Sunday night and release every Monday, and it's really fun just to get together with those two and just riff on some Oiler topics every week.
That's awesome, man. Um, so you said this was something that you've been planning since last summer almost?
Yeah, we've been planning it for quite a while. It took a long time to get off and running, but we've eventually did, and it's been fun.
Do you normally just do game recaps or talk about the stories around the team, or is it just kind of change on the fly every week?
It really just changes on the fly every week. I try to make a list of topics every week. So we kind of stick around what's going on around the team. We recap some games and some hot topics that we've seen on Twitter and some discussion that people have been going through. And yeah, we just three people just talking about the Oilers, right? We try to keep it as casual as possible.
That's awesome, man. It sounds fairly similar to this one. And speaking
Yeah.
of topics around the team, we've got a great one to discuss tonight, and that is, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, a big Oilers victory over the Calgary Flames. And Preston, uh, I never get tired of talking about the Oilers beating Calgary. And thanks to the All Canadian division this season, I've had the opportunity to break down several wins for the Orange and Blue in the Battle of Alberta. And tonight we're going to do that again as the Oilers defeated their hated provincial rivals 3-2 on Friday night. And with the victory, the Oilers not only moved into a tie with the Winnipeg Jets for second place in the North Division, they also have the tiebreaker, but they extinguished any remaining hopes the Flames had of making the playoffs, which makes the win extra sweet. Um, what did you think of the Oilers' resilience to bounce back with a big win after a very disappointing 4-0 loss to the Montreal Canadiens a few nights earlier?
Yeah, I think they responded well. You could tell off the hop of at the hop of the opening faceoff that they had more energy, and that they were pushing the play a lot more than they had in the Montreal game. They looked in like so flat against the Montreal Canadiens, and for them to come out against the provincial rival and just bring it to them early and often was good to see.
Oh, absolutely. And to me, I know Montreal kind of has had their number this season. I think the Oilers were 1-3 against them, and all three of those losses to the Habs weren't, very good performances. But that game was at the end of an extended road trip. The Oilers looked tired. They only had 16 shots on goal. I more attribute that to them just being worn down, especially the night after a huge win over the Toronto Maple Leafs. I just think they didn't have a lot of gas left in the tank.
Yeah, I thought they were tired, but I also thought they didn't I'm failing to find the word here. They underestimated the Montreal Canadiens coming off that break. I think they
Hmm.
expected the Canadiens to be a lot more rusty than they were. When they just came out energized and they looked well rested, right, against a tired Oilers team.
Yeah. And I really didn't know how that was going to go. I thought Montreal might have some rust and the Oilers would be able to jump on them, but it was the complete opposite. The Habs were just taking it to them early on. And when your top guys like McDavid, Draisaitl, Nugent Hopkins aren't looking like their normal selves and jumping up in the play and contributing offense the way you expect, it's going to be a tough night. It just really looked like all the big guns who play so many minutes on a regular basis were burnt out.
Yeah, and I wasn't too big of a fan of Dave Tippett's game management during that Montreal game. I feel um, when the team is down in the dumps and struggling to score, I think it's a good idea to put McDavid and Drysdale together to jumpstart some offense.
Oh, for
But
sure.
when you're on back-to-back games and you're going against a rested team, you should split those guys up, give them two good scoring lines. And on defense, I think you should play a Bouchard or a Jones. You shouldn't have your defenseman that played the night before, who just squeaked out a win, um, out again, right? They have the
Yeah.
guys that are on the taxi squad that can do it, and I just don't know why Tippett is ignoring them.
It's one of those tough calls. I really think that Dave doesn't like to change the lineup too much after a win. However, in a condensed schedule like we're seeing this winter, and the fact that the games mean so much because it's a reduced schedule, you have to use your taxi squad and your depth players more often. And yes, it's great to reward the players who got you the victory, but I really think at times you can take a guy out of the lineup if it's a third, fourth line player just to give your team some more rested legs. And that was a game where they could have needed it. However, I don't know how much of a difference it would have made because like I said, all the top players were pretty burnt out by the looks of it. So I'm not sure it would have made that much of a difference. Just getting back to the Calgary game now, I think the first thing I'd like to talk about is just the play of Mike Smith. And it's like he keeps getting better this season as it goes on, despite being 39 years old. And I've loved seeing him get the best of his old team this season. I thought he had another solid outing on Friday night. He allowed one goal in the first period on a booming shot that he didn't even see because of former Oiler Milan Lucic screening him in the crease. So I give him a bit of a pass on that. And then in the second period, Matt Tkachuk scores a breakaway goal on him after just jumping out of the penalty box moments earlier. So there's not much he could have done on that. But other than those two goals, Smith had the answer to every other Calgary Flames shot on net. Preston, how much credit do you give Smith for the win on Friday? And really, how important has he been to the Oilers' success all season?
I give Mike Smith all the credit in the world. I was one of the people last summer or last offseason, I guess, who criticized the Oilers bringing back Smith as a backup goaltender. But he hasn't been a backup goaltender. He's been a starting goaltender and a pretty darn good one as well. I think he brings a lot of stability to the Oilers' crease. It was a position that a lot of people had problems with early on in the season with just Koskinen being in there. And he really came in there and stabilized everything and has given the Oilers a chance to win every single night. The amount of uh, top level saves that he puts into a game is crazy. Like the Oilers are not a great defensive team right now, and he is bailing them out more often than not, which is not something I expected to be saying at this point in the season.
Yeah, I think they rank 19th in the league in goals against. But it's just he really has proved a lot of people wrong, and I just love the way that he has come in here with and he's sort of a player who has that chip on his shoulder anyway. You see him in interviews, you hear the media describe how he's a fiery personality and someone who can really lift the boys up in the dressing room, which is sort of rare because a lot of goaltenders are more introverted or keep to themselves kind of guys, and he almost is like a leader in that locker room, getting the team, jacked up before a game and really being sort of that voice to say, okay, we're going to win this period, we're going to win this game. And with the victory, Smith improved to 13-3-1 this year. Also, his goals against average and save percentage are currently the best since he was with the Arizona Coyotes back in 2011, 2012. More impressively, Smith has only allowed 2 goals in 3 of his last 4 starts. And with the Oilers averaging 3.29 goals per game, which is 4th in the league, that combination of consistent goaltending and offensive production is really why the Oilers are still in a division, or in the hunt for a division title, I should say, after a slow start, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. Like I said, I keep expecting him to regress, and it doesn't seem he's going to do that. He's only gotten better as the season has worn on, and that's got to be a positive for the Oilers. Like I thought goaltending would be their biggest weakness, and it's turned out to be a strength with Mike Smith in net. So he will make his mistakes playing the puck, and I will be there to criticize him. But he more than often shuts me up with like a 10 bell save 5 minutes later. So
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and I really don't know if he's their goaltender moving forward. I talked about this on the last podcast too. Is it worth bringing him back next year if he takes the Oilers on a deep playoff run? I still think Ken Holland needs to examine the free agent market and see which goalies are out there, as he did last fall as well. It seemed like Smith was their insurance policy. Like we're going to try and bring in a better goalie. We know they even went out and tried to pursue Jacob Markstrom, who eventually signed with Calgary. But Smith was sitting there at the end, and they were able to bring him back on a cheap deal. And maybe this is his last kick at the can this season. But the way he's playing, if he can take the Oilers on a lengthy playoff run, he may be able to extend his NHL career by another year or two.
yeah, I agree with you. I don't think he should be the Oilers starting goaltender moving forward. The way I see it, you took the bet on him at 39 years old and it paid off. You don't take that same bet at 40 years old. It's too much of a risk, and I think there will be better goaltenders available this offseason, and you got to try your best to bring in a younger, proven goalie other than kind of a high risk, high reward player like Smith.
Absolutely. And we still haven't seen Alex Stalock in net yet either. And I really think there's a chance he could come in and give the Oilers some quality starts as well. He eventually stole the starting job briefly in Minnesota last year, and he's put up some solid numbers as a backup. And right now, I think he has the potential to give Koskinen a run for his money as the backup job.
Yeah, absolutely. I like Stalock as a player. I know his stats last season weren't that great, but the way Koskinen has been trending lately, I think it wouldn't hurt to give him a game or two. That's not to say that I'm just totally lost confidence in Koskinen. I think that Montreal game, he didn't have a lot of a chance right off the get-go. Like, people will say all they want that he let in the first shot of the game, but that first shot of the game was a point shot by Kotkaniemi. So yeah, I feel like the Oilers get up to play more often when Smith is in the starting net, more so than Koskinen.
I just feel like they have that confidence in him. And we've seen this several times this season where after a bit of a shaky start for Mike Smith, he settles in and it just looks like another puck isn't getting past him for the rest of the night. It happened on the road in Vancouver when they were down 3-0 and battled back to win 4-3. It happened against the Maple Leafs last week where the Oilers were trailing 2-1 in the first period, eventually worked their way back into the game and won it 3-2 in overtime. He's just he's given this team such confidence back there. And I think that the players are able to play with, it's not like they don't have to come back and support in the defensive zone. They still do, but they feel the confidence to move the puck up ice and not be so worried that any play that's coming back towards their zone could end up in the back of the net. And sometimes when Koskinen's in goal, I sometimes get the feeling like they're just waiting for that next one to go in.
Yeah, I do see that a lot in this team. I would say that they should play a little better defensively when Mike Smith is in a net, because I think
Oh,
they
of
rely
course.
on him a little too much to make some crazy saves. But hey, all the credit to Mike Smith. I didn't expect this. I fully expected to be on a podcast at this point in the season, saying how much of a mistake it was to sign him, and he's totally making me look stupid earlier on in the year.
You know what? A lot of Oilers fans have been proved wrong, and I'm completely fine with that because he
Oh yeah, me too.
if he's proving us wrong, that means that the Oilers are playing great and that they're in the right place. I mean, if someone would have told us back in early January that the Oilers would be tied for second place in the division at this point in the season, I think everyone would have taken it.
Oh yeah, for sure. It was a super concerning start, and they've been able to turn it around into a pretty decent season.
Absolutely. All right, let's move on to Leon Draisaitl now. And Preston, I thought he was the Oilers' best player last night. He registered 2 assists in the win over the Flames, giving him 56 points this season, second only to Connor McDavid in league scoring. He was also 68% in the faceoff circle, and he won the most important draw of the game in the third period, which obviously set up McDavid's game-winning goal on the power play. And aside from that, I thought he played a strong defensive game as well. He was back checking hard, taking away passes, getting his sticks in lanes, and just he is not only an outstanding offensive player, he shows that when he wants to be, he can be a very dependable defensive performer as well. And just he's a guy who seems to find a way to contribute offensively every night. When he can add these different elements to his game, being a guy who can win a timely faceoff, a guy who can get back and be a difference maker in the defensive zone as well. He's one of the best players in the NHL at not just contributing offense, but with his ability to rag the puck and extend plays in the offensive zone. I can't say enough good things about this guy. What did you think of his game on Friday night?
I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was one of his best defensive games of the year, and I really think this has been his best season in the NHL in terms of his play in all three zones of the ice. And it makes sense. He has all the tools to be a good defensive player. He's a tall guy who can hold onto the puck. He can knock guys off the puck, and he's got that long reach. And what I like to compare this season to is the season he finally learned how to use his size to score, right? When he got sent back in his rookie year to Prince Albert and later the Kelowna Rockets,
Right.
and then he came back over that summer and improved his skating, improved his puck handling in the offensive zone, and then he came back and had like 70, 80 points. I think this past summer he realized he needed to be a better defensive player, and he came back and did just that. Um, and like I said, it just makes sense. He's one of the best players in the world, and he's finally putting it together in his own end, which is probably one of the hardest things to do when you're a superstar known for scoring.
Yeah, and I think that Draisaitl's always going to get a little bit of that Evgeny Malkin treatment. Let's not forget a few years ago when the NHL did their 100 best players of all time, Malkin wasn't included in the list, despite being a two-time scoring champion, former MVP, a guy who's won 3 cups, but he plays in the shadow of Sidney Crosby. And we look at Leon Draisaitl, as long as he's in Edmonton and McDavid's in Edmonton, he's always going to play second fiddle to number 97. And I don't think that really bothers him. In fact, those two guys, I believe, as close of friends they are, they push each other to be the best player night in and night out. And last season, Leon actually got the better of Connor and finished 13 points ahead of him, won the scoring title, won the Hart Trophy, won the Ted Lindsay Award. And he showed that he can be that dominant of a player. I mean, he's coming off back-to-back 100-point seasons. He scored 50 goals 2 years ago. We know the type of offensive player he is, but if he can continue to make this sort of step defensively, you look at how much improved his plus-minus rating is this season. I really think he could eventually become a Selke Trophy candidate as well.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think he's quite there yet, but give him a few years. If he continues to improve like he has shown he can over summers and over off seasons, I think the Selke Trophy is not out of his grasp by any means in 2 or 3 years. And the thing with Draisaitl is I think he plays better when he's the guy on the line. I think as good as the chemistry between him and McDavid is, I think he is able to push the play towards the offensive end better when he's the guy at center and he's directing traffic. We've seen how he can pass and how he can find players. And when he's with McDavid, he's good at that too. But I feel like he just looks for McDavid a little more than he should.
And understandably so. I mean,
Yeah,
McDavid is the best player in the world, and those two love to play with each other. Look, we all know how good Draisaitl was last season playing with Kyler Yamamoto and Ryan Nugent-Hopkins. And fans have been calling for that line to be reunited basically since they were separated late in the regular season last year and just briefly played together in the final game of the playoffs. But Leon Draisaitl, like you said, has the ability to drive a line. I mean, he's the second line center in Edmonton. He'd be the first line center in almost every other team in the NHL. There might be
absolutely.
a handful of teams where he wouldn't at most. I still think, he's right up there with Nathan MacKinnon or Nikita Kucherov, whoever you want to have in there as the second, third best player in the world. We always default to him being in the top 5. And you know what, to have him in that category is fantastic, but I don't think he's just the default 5 because he plays with Connor McDavid. His numbers are just as good as any of those guys, if not better. So, could he still be the second best player in the NHL? I think so. And that's kind of what I was getting to before when I said playing in the shadow of McDavid, that because he plays on the same team and sometimes the same line, he's never going to fully get the credit for how talented of a player he is, I believe.
No, I agree with you absolutely. I think a lot of people will do that. They'll look at him playing behind McDavid and be like, "Oh, well, he plays with McDavid on the power play. He plays on a line with him for extended periods of time. That's why he's as good as he is." But people have to realize that Leon Draisaitl is not the only player that's played beside Connor McDavid. A lot of players have played beside him and not produced at the level that Draisaitl has.
Right.
And the fact that he has driven his own line going over almost a year here and has looked arguably better than he has when he was with McDavid, right? So there will always be those people that attribute his success to Connor McDavid, but you gotta give credit to the big German. He's a fantastic player.
And every superstar in the league plays with other good players. It only makes sense to put your best players together at some point. So I never really get that
Yeah.
narrative of, oh, he should be able to do it apart from McDavid. Well, yeah, he can still create offense on his own. But it just makes sense to me that he would have more points playing with McDavid. Everyone gets more points playing with McDavid, and
Yeah.
it's just, that's the thing that gets me. But no, he's been fantastic all year. And actually, if he were to finish second in league scoring behind Connor and hold off Patrick Kane, who's chasing him, McDavid and Draisaitl would be the first teammates to finish first and second in league scoring in back-to-back years since Bobby Orr and Phil Esposito in 1972-73 and 73-74, I believe. I saw that stat on Sportsnet the other day, or it might be 73, 74, 74, 75. But the point is, it's been like 45 years since there's been a pair of teammates who have been at the top of the scoring in back-to-back years, which is just
That
unreal.
that's a crazy statistic considering that the Oilers of the 1980s never did that with guys like Gretzky and Messier and Curry.
Yeah,
So
well,
yeah, the Oilers have something special here with those two players, and we shouldn't be taking it for granted. Like it's a treat for us to be able to watch Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl go to work every night.
absolutely. And let's actually talk a little bit about McDavid now. That game, it's not often where he isn't the best player on the ice, but like I said, I'll give the nod to Draisaitl in that game. McDavid, though, eventually gets the game-winning goal, as we talked about. He had an assist taken away on the Nugent Hopkins goal in the first period on the power play, which, looking back at the goal now, I can kind of see how a Flames player swatted the puck away. But at first I was like, well, why are they taking that assist away? Because he was credited with it eventually, or initially, I should say. But just another stellar game from him. And it's like deja vu. Do you remember a few weeks ago, the Oilers and Flames were tied 2-2, and McDavid came down the wing and just fired a wrist shot post and in past Markstrom with about 3 minutes to play that gave them the victory. And that was a 3-2 win. They got another 3-2 win with him providing the game-winning goal in the third period. What can you just say about number 97's game on Friday?
Well, I think Patrick Kane put it best this past week when he said it wasn't even a discussion who's going to win the Hart Trophy this year, and that Connor McDavid was far and away the best player in the NHL and the world. It's just more of the same from Connor McDavid, which is fantastic. I think he's gotten a chip on his shoulder this year. You know, a lot of people are discrediting the Oilers this year for winning so many against the Ottawa Senators, and I think he took that personally. And when it comes to playing the Calgary Flames, he didn't grow, but I think he's grown into the Battle of Alberta, and yeah, I don't know. I'm always speechless when I talk about Connor McDavid. He's just
Yeah,
good at everything.
I mean, he really is fueled by a burning desire to win. And when you have the unbelievable skill set that he has and that internal drive to succeed, you're bound to win a Stanley Cup eventually. The thing that I don't understand about that argument that he gets to play the Senators a lot, everyone in the North Division gets to play the Senators. The Oilers are the only team that's undefeated against them. And if you look at every division around the NHL, there's a weak team in every single one of them. So what about all the teams that get to play the Buffalo Sabres? Do those points mean less? It's, you know what I mean?
It
It doesn't seem like a strong point.
it's definitely something just to discredit the Oilers for the sake of discrediting them. I maybe it's because I'm an Oilers fan and I hear a lot of the criticism directed towards the Oilers, but it seems like every time there's a chance to discredit Connor McDavid and the Edmonton Oilers, other fans are going to take it. So I've learned to tune it out and to just enjoy the wins as they come, which is pretty often now this year.
Absolutely. And I really think that the Oilers still do have that stigma attached to them as a team that won 4 draft lotteries in a span of 6 years and a team that missed the playoffs for a decade. And then after getting back to the playoffs 1 year, missed it the next 2 years in a row after. They really need to be a consistent playoff team, go on some deep runs, win a cup to get that respect from around the league. I truly believe that until they do those things, it doesn't matter how strong of a regular season the Oilers have, because this is the second year in a row where they've been a very good regular season team. But until they get it done in the playoffs, I just feel like that narrative is always going to be attached to the Oilers that they're this 1 man or 2 man team, which is completely false when you look at the roster and how many other players are contributing this year. It's just because McDavid and Draisaitl attract so much spotlight, and the Oilers and fans look at how the Oilers got those players by being a horrible team that was picking at the top of the draft. It's an easy way to take shots at them, I feel.
Yeah, the NHL is a ruthless place to be a team. Even a good team. You look at a team like the Washington Capitals. They were contenders. They won President trophies, but they'd go far in the playoffs, but never quite win a cup. And they were the brunt of the choking joke for a long time. So The only thing that can
Well,
wash away the sins of the past is a Stanley Cup championship, right?
yeah, I mean, and look at Alex Ovechkin. If I'm not mistaken, well, this is his 15th NHL season. He's only made it past the second round one time in his career, and that one time they won the Stanley Cup. So, it's not like he's had a ton of playoff success either. It's like you said, some very good regular season, 50-win team, President's Trophy, all that. But it's not like they've been to the conference final 5 years in a row or, won a couple cups. It was really that one year where they were able to uh, get by. I mean, the Penguins were in their way for a long time with Sidney Crosby, but it's really been that one year that they were able to win it all.
Yeah. Well, and you look at teams that were bad before their dynasties. Well, I'm gonna classify them as modern day dynasties with Chicago and Pittsburgh this past decade. No one ever talks about the Blackhawks before 2010, right? You never hear
Yeah,
about how bad they were before then. You never hear how bad the Penguins were before they picked Crosby and started winning, right? So, championships will make people have shorter memory spans.
exactly. It really does kind of wash away everything in the past if you can win. There's a couple other guys I'd like to get your thoughts on. Ethan Bear, for one. I really liked his game against the Flames. I think he's starting to look a lot more like the player we saw last season. And I mean, he made an excellent heads up play to set up Kyler Yamamoto, who then made a sweet pass to Dominic Cahoon for the second goal. And I think that if he keeps playing this way, it's only a matter of time until we'll see him reunited with Darnell Nurse on the top pairing. And those two, I mean, we remember how solid they were together last year. And I think that with the way he's been playing and the way that Tyson Barrie has struggled lately, that could be a guy that we see moving up in getting his minutes bumped.
Oh yeah, for sure. I've been a part of the Ethan Bears, our best right-handed defenseman camp for quite a while. I think he did start off a bit slow this year, but that's expected out of a young defender like
He had a
Bear. You
concussion too,
gotta
right? I mean,
Yeah, so you
that
gotta
really
give him a
set him back.
chance.
Yeah, we have to remember,
And
like, he had that concussion early. He missed 3 weeks worth of time, and he didn't look right when he came back at first. I think we're just finally starting to see him get over that.
Yeah, and the fact that I've seen his name in trade rumors and trade speculation is really disheartening because we're talking about a guy who was our top right-handed defenseman last year. He's young, he's on a cheap deal. He's not going to go and get paid like 7 million on his next deal. So give the guy a chance. I think he played less than 10 minutes against the Flames, and he was arguably our best defenseman. So I think he needs a promotion ASAP.
Yeah, I mean, this is a guy that I've liked right from the time the Oilers drafted him. When you can find an 18-year-old kid in the WHL, a defenseman who scored 13 goals in his draft year. I don't know how he slipped to the fifth round, but that was a great find for Edmonton. And he's just continued to get better every step along the way, playing with Seattle in the dub, eventually going to Bakersfield, working his way up to the NHL. He was like found money last year when he came in and was a instant top four defenseman for the Oilers in training camp and just continued to get better all last year. There has been a little bit of a sophomore slump, as we talked about, but I mean, the guy's still only 23, and we know how long it takes for defensemen to kind of hit their stride at the NHL level. Look at Darnell Nurse. The last 3 years of his career have been the best years of his best years with the Oilers, but especially this year. Like, he's looked like a Norris caliber defenseman, and it's going to take some time for Bear to become the player he is, but I don't think he's a finished product at all. We're going to see him continue to grow his game over the next few years.
Yeah, for sure. And I know a lot of people will point to Tyson Barrie's point totals and be like, well, why have Bear when we have this guy putting up this many points? And you know what? It's super nice to have defensemen put up points. Like I'm not discrediting Barrie. He's been fantastic as a point producer, but when it really comes down to it, Ethan Bear is the better, more well-rounded defensive player, and that's more important as a defenseman.
Right.
And like you said, you see Tyson Barrie struggling mightily these past few games, and you think back to Dave Tippett's press conference about accountability. Like this, it's got to be accountability for everyone, not just the rookies.
I feel like, but we know this. Veterans do get a little more leeway. When Adam Larson was having some struggles earlier in the year, we all knew he wasn't going to get scratched and sit in the press box. Now, if a guy like William Lagesson has a couple rough games, it's way more easier to make him a healthy scratch. There is that thing in the league where, depending on how much money you make, depending on much experience you have in the league and how valuable you are to the team, that you get a little more leeway than a guy who's just trying to break in. And for someone like Tyson Barrie, he had an unreal start to the season. And yes, some people will say he's getting a lot of secondary assists, but there is value still in getting the puck onto Connor McDavid's stick, even if it's just a one-touch pass and he takes from there and goes and either sets up a goal or scores. There's value in that. He had 30 points in his first 33 games. Yes, the last few games haven't been great. I mean, he struggled to get shots through on Friday. Obviously, the worst was that block shot that led to the Tkachuk goal, and I believe he's -5 in his last 3 games, which, isn't great, especially when he's gone without a point during that time as well. But I'm willing to give Barrie the benefit of the doubt, and he's been so solid all year that if a player goes through a little bit of a rough patch, I'm gonna still stick with him and hope that he bounces back from it. I think it's unfair to write off a guy who's been that valuable to the Oilers, especially when they've been looking for a player of his ilk for basically a decade, to have a guy who can come in and contribute elite offensive production from the back end.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. Like I said, I wasn't discrediting him at all. It's just when you see a player like him struggling as much as he has in these past few games, yeah, obviously you're not going to write off his entire season for it. But I just can't get over the comparisons in ice time between Barrie and Ethan Bear. Like, even just swapping them for a game would be enough for me to be okay with it, right? You got to play your best players
Yeah.
more, right? So
And
yeah, no,
I don't think you were discrediting him, but there is definitely a movement on Oilers Twitter of fans who really want Evan Bouchard in that spot. And don't get me wrong,
mhm.
I'm a huge Evan Bouchard fan too. And I think that they are kind of, I don't want to say messing up, but they're not handling his development this season as well as I would have liked them to. And part of that is out of their hands with the COVID restrictions, sending him back and forth from Bakersfield. I I just think at this point it seems like he's their number 4 right shot defenseman, and unless someone is hurt, he's probably not going to be in the lineup. And that's unfortunate, but I'm really high on his potential. As for Barrie, though, right now, he probably is. I mean, he is still, I think, the better offensive player at this point. That doesn't mean that Evan Bouchard won't surpass him, maybe even within a year from now. But it's just for a guy who is at the dollar figure that Barrie is, he's come in on an affordable deal, which was a benefit to the Oilers that he came in on that to boost his numbers and maybe hit a home run in his next contract. I think he's given Edmonton everything they could have asked for him. So there has to be, like I said, some bit of leeway for him. And if he has a couple tough games, I'll have faith that he'll bounce back from it. But there are a lot of Oilers fans who almost kind of seem to resent him for the fact that he's blocking Bouchard's path to the NHL right now.
Yeah, I get that resentment. I know I'm a very big fan of Evan Bouchard as well. I think he can come in and make an immediate impact, but it is just an unfortunate situation where they have 3 kind of established right-handed defensemen on the
Right.
roster right now. What I would do is put them into Bakersfield for the year. I know the team is reluctant to do that just in case of injury, but I think that's in the best interest of both the player and the organization. I think a lot of the resentment comes from like the possibility of the Oilers re-signing him to a larger deal, which is something that
Right.
I'm very scared of. Like I said, he's having a fantastic season and good for him. I'm happy for him and I'm happy for what he brings to the Oilers. But you have to take Edmonton's future cap situation into account and be like, okay, well, we have a guy like Evan Bouchard who is a similar type player and could possibly fill that role at a much cheaper price point, and he's younger. And it doesn't make sense to dedicate a whole bunch of money to a guy like Barrie moving forward.
I see what you're saying there. Here, the risk is that you let Barrie walk, and maybe that'll be out of their hands. He might just price himself out of Edmonton, and they, they don't have a choice. He's just gone. But if they do have the opportunity to bring him back at a reasonable cap hit, having that insurance policy seems like something that Holland would be a big fan of doing. The downside of it is, what happens if they have the opportunity to bring him back at, say, 3.5, 4 million, but they choose not to, and then they give Bouchard the opportunity to step into his role, and he's not ready for it right away. Now you've let a potential 50 to 60 point defenseman walk out the door. I've I worry about that. But on the other hand, if you bring back Barry and Evan Bouchard is ready, well, now you're stapled to that Barry contract for 3 to 4 years, and you're not giving him the power play time because Evan Bouchard's ready to step into that role. So it's a tricky situation. I'm glad I'm not the one who has to make the decision. Ken Holland is paid $5 million a year and has been around the game for over 30 years. So I trust him to make that call more than myself.
Yeah, it's a difficult situation for sure. I think what is going to come down to this offseason is whether the team signs Adam Larson or if they decide to sign Tyson Barrie, and those are two very different type of defenders. I think it's going to be one of them coming back and one of them going. That's just my personal view on the situation. If I were a betting man, I lean towards Larson. I think they will try to get Bouchard sometime, and it
Yeah.
will carry risk for sure.
I think Larson is someone who they could actually get at a cheaper cap hit. Like, he is making 4.1 right now. They might be able to get him for under 4. Like, it's a different world right now with the what's the word I'm looking for? The stagnant
Pandemic?
cap. Like, no, yeah, well, the
Yeah.
cap, it's not going up. It's a flat cap is what I was looking for.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's staying at 81.5 million for the next couple of years likely. They can sell that to him and his agent the same way they're probably going to be talking to Nugent Hopkins, saying, "Look, you probably would have made more money had the pandemic not hit, but this is the reality of the situation. This is the type of money we can offer you. If you can get more money somewhere around the league, it's probably going to be with a lesser team that has the cap room, because all of the top teams in the NHL don't have a ton of cap flexibility. So for him to come back and play on a good team like the Oilers and still be able to maybe make 3.5 million, that would be a good thing for Larson, I believe. And also, if they let him go, now you've got three very similar defensemen on the right side. And I think
Yeah.
losing his size and toughness is something that I think would be a mistake for the Oilers to let him go, especially when you don't have someone on the left side who can kind of replace that. Like, Darnell Nurse for sure is that type of defenseman as well, but he does other things as well. To have someone who's strictly like a defensive defenseman, as Larson is, that is something that I think would be a mistake to let him go.
Yeah, for sure. When it comes to this offseason and the cap, I know the Oilers have a lot of money coming off the books, but you have to look at what contracts they have to sign. Like Nugent Hopkins needs a new deal. Kyler Yamamoto's up. Then you're going to have to decide on guys like Adam Larson and Tyson Barrie. They don't have as much room as you might think, and while it's more than previous years, it's just going to be a difficult decision. I do like Adam Larson. He did start out fairly not very good. I was not very happy with his play early on, but he's come into his own since then and has
Oh
proven to
yeah.
be a valuable player.
I think he's
Um,
looked the best he has in maybe 2 years.
yeah, no, I completely agree. He's had a rough few years here in Edmonton, and well, he's had multiple injuries, the passing of his dad as well.
Right.
Like it's been rough for him. So I'm always cheering for that guy. And if they can get him under 3 or under 4, it would be a fantastic deal.
Yeah.
I'd say do it every day of the week.
I agree. I don't think they would get him under 3. Under 4 is a definite possibility. And
Yeah.
look, they're going to have a ton of money coming off the books. I believe they're going to have 26 million in cap space this year, but I believe that only covers 12 roster players. So you still have, like I said, 26 million, but that has to be allocated to the 8 guys who are going to fill in those spots.
Yeah.
And if you're going to throw huge money at a free agent and give someone, 8 million, well, now you're limiting the amount of cap room you have to fill out the rest of your team. But just sticking with the Flames game before we call it a night here, was there anything else that stood out to you in the game? I know the Oilers were strong on the power play last night. Is there anything else that we didn't touch on that stood out to you in the Oilers' victory?
Yeah, you know what? It's the Oilers' resiliency this year. I think when the Oilers have a one goal lead in the third period, it's not too often this year that they blow it. You know, they did do it against Toronto last weekend, but that doesn't happen very often. So I think it's nice to have a team that knows when to lock it down and how to lock it down, and that they've been pretty effective at that. I think they have a pretty good record in one goal games, which is something the Oilers haven't had in a long time. So
They also have some of the most regulation wins in the NHL. So
yeah.
if I think it was I'm trying to remember who put it out on Twitter. If they showed what the standings would look like if it was a 3-point
That
system
might
for
have
every
me. That
game.
might have been me.
Was it you?
It might have. I did do something like that a few weeks ago because I'm
Okay,
a big supporter of the 3-point system. So
that's
yeah,
funny. I should have been giving you credit.
at
No,
the
but
point in the year they were fighting with the Tampa Bay Lightning in a
yeah,
system like that. So
no, that's awesome. I was trying to remember who it was, and if it turned out to be you, that's hilarious. But no, they're look, that's one of the other things. In 3-on-3 overtime, the Oilers are so dominant because of the skill they have in the open ice. I mean, McDavid and Draisaitl, if they can win the opening faceoff, sometimes the other team doesn't touch the puck. You look at the Toronto game; they didn't win the faceoff. The Leafs got one shot on goal. The Oilers came back down the ice and won the game 17 seconds into overtime. So it's a pretty lethal combination, especially when they're all such good skaters. You got Darnell Nurse out there, who's one of the best skating defensemen in the NHL. Connor McDavid, who's the fastest player to ever play the game, and Leon Draisaitl, who, despite having that large frame, is able to generate a pretty powerful skating stride. Um, but yeah, it's exciting to see that this team is getting it done in regulation. They're not giving up that extra point in losses, which when you're in an all divisional matchup and basically playing the teams that you're battling with for a playoff spot night in and night out, that's been a huge benefit to the team this year.
yeah, for sure, it's nice to have a team that doesn't rely on overtime wins, right? It's they get it done in regulation, and like you said, that's so important in an all division year like this year.
For sure. Well, Preston, I want to thank you so much for joining me on the show tonight. And just before we go, just tell everyone where they can follow you.
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at NHL Hodgkinson. That's NHLHODGKINSON. I write for Copper and Blue. The Copper and Blue podcast comes out every Monday at noon Mountain Time. And if you're in St. Albert, I also write a few articles and produce a podcast for the St. Albert Gazette. It's called the St. Albert Signal, and you can catch that on the St. Albert Today website every Saturday.
That's awesome. So everyone, please give Preston a follow and go check out his work. I enjoy reading his stuff and listening to his podcast. He does a great job over there. So thanks again, man, for being on the show tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So for Preston Hodgkinson, I'm Eric Friesen. This has been the 99 Forever podcast. We're out.
Oilers Live.